Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint program. Personalities, politicians, and perspectives in the fire beat control of the mic will proceed. As I said before while I was being talked over, Viewpoint program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. We've got a great guest again.
Yes.
An annual guest, and we always look forward to this morning. But as we usually do with Viewpoint, we try to come up with a kudo or two, and I have a really very big one this morning, and also one with a little bit of regrets. Those of us who have been familiar with the work of the college know that we have some really, Lincoln College that would be, of course, some really great folks on board on that hill up there, some great instructors, not the least of which, and perhaps the most of which, would be Dr. Dennis Campbell. Dr. Campbell will be retiring this year from actual classroom instruction, but he will still be here working with Creekside, his baby, up there in the north side of town. Creekside Environmental Studies Center. Last Saturday they had Earth Day up there, and John, I doubt if your schedule will allow you to make that appearance up there, but we had a nice little crowd up there. A lot of work went into planning this and pulling it off, and including bring some of our musical students up there for a little entertainment while the folks had a little something to eat. Creekside Environmental Studies, brainchild of Dr. Dennis Campbell. Doctor, we're going to miss you in the classroom up there. What an influence you have been on I don't know how many students down your years of teaching. So kudos to Dr. Dennis Campbell. And did you ever hear the word connubial bliss, Mrs. Busby?
Yes, I'm not personally familiar with it, but yes.
Well, I'm not sure that Jean and I are either. But tomorrow we'll have concluded 67 years of what was known as connubial bliss. Those of you who might go look it up at your Webster's Dictionary, you might know what that means. But
you know that this summer we would have been 60.
Yeah.
But, of course, Buzz got a better offer, so we'll not be having a celebration. Don't look in your mail for an invitation.
We've got a couple of announcements to make, two of which are very important. So
yes,
go right ahead.
You always speak of Lincoln College as on the hill, but I have something from the Really Hill.
Okay.
The Hill in Logan County, which we call Elkhart.
Look how she segged into that, John. She's a pro. I mean, she just moved right into that.
Jim, do I get hazard pay for being here? Good. Okay, the Elkhart Historical Society is delighted to announce an extraordinary lunch and lecture program for mothers on Saturday, May 7th, at Horse Feathers Wild Hare Cafe in Elkhart. What a well-dressed mother wore in the 1800s. That'd be kind of cute, you know. It's presented by Nancy Torgerson of Forsyth. Now that's a good Scandinavian name, so I think I pronounced it right, okay? She's a well-known historic interpreter, teacher, author, clothing consultant to museums, and 19th century custom tailor and dressmaker. Her accurate and occasionally humorous portrayal of the layers required of the best-dressed mothers of society will make you thankful to be in the 21st century. Men are welcome to bring their mothers and may get some insight as to the extremes and equipment required to have an 18-inch waist. Well, thank God that's not in style anymore. Huh?
My waist was 26 when I came out of the Air Corps. That was 1946.
That was a couple years ago.
Yeah,
well, you can call up there and make reservations. They're having a lovely lunch, and the number is 217, of course, 899-2238. Further with announcements, the CEO program at the high school that we had on Viewpoint here a few weeks ago.
Reading Opportunities. What an organization that is. What a great program.
They're having their trade show. This has never happened before. This is their first, their maiden voyage, and it's 11 new businesses opening on the same day, and it'll be this Wednesday That be this Wednesday, this very day.
This very day.
From 4 to 6 at the Legion, and history will be made. So come and see what these kids have done at the high school. This is really an amazing program. And then Wednesday next at the Oasis here in Lincoln, and I don't think that needs any directions or anything. I think we all know where that is. They are having a schnitzel supper, and tickets are available, so they would very much appreciate your attendance.
Well,
please and thank you.
That'd be a nice place that we could just postpone our anniversary for a week and have a wedding dinner out there.
A wedding dinner would be good. And schnitzels are very German. Your family would appreciate.
Yeah, part of my family. The rest of them not maybe so much so. Okay. We did all that pretty well, I thought. Got smoked through that pretty well. Why don't we just get right down to serious business here, the reason for you and I being here, and introduce our guest, and then we're going to prevail upon him to warm things up the rest of the day.
Always happy to have him. You know, John, I think you'd grin if they kicked you. You just are a happy fella.
Makes people wonder what you're up to, right?
There you go. John Fulton is the Extension Advisor, and he comes to be with us a couple times a year to talk about what happened during the growing season. And now, of course, being spring, we're going to talk about what's going to happen. And the trees are shedding all of their little seed things, plugging up the gutters and so forth. And the little tiny flowers are blooming or have bloomed, and things are coming along. And how about the farmer's end of the growing season? How's the water table and the weather for them?
Well, we'd like a little less wind and a little more constant temperatures. The ups and downs have been rather tremendous, and I don't know if anybody could have believed that much corn could have been planted in about 4 days, but it happened.
Well, if you work around the clock, that helps.
We went from about 5% to over 80% in 4 days.
Oh, boy.
Is that a fact?
That's a lot of corn.
Oh,
you
my
bet.
goodness gracious.
So,
that's a lot of gasoline.
Yes,
well, they don't use much gasoline anymore, but yeah, making it, I guess. But and there's some soybeans planted, not all that many. Most are waiting to get the storm system out of the way, and we sure wish the wind would die down so we could get some spraying completed and be ready for the next phase.
Yeah, it seemed like a short spring. I mean, you know, we had a few days of warm weather, and then it got kind of snarky a little bit, and today is certainly not anything to write home about. John, in as far as planting, what does the soil temperature have to be for these boys to, and some ladies, I guess, getting out there in the field?
Well, that's subjective and sometimes trumped by the calendar. Mm-hmm. You'd like to see it 55 and going up, you know, for corn germination, and add about 5 to 10 degrees to it for soybeans, but it's been up and down. You know, we had bursts of spring 2 months ago, and you know, it cooled back down, and then we had those hard freezes that affected some of the small fruits like raspberries and so forth. Some of the raspberries were killed or killed back further. The actual buds and so forth on them froze. So you know, there was some damage to some of the small fruits, possibly the strawberries. I think a lot of folks are kind of thinking we're going to have a smaller strawberry crop for those who grow them, and so some of those things were affected. Some of the apple leaves and the other fruits, it got cold enough to affect peaches and apricots, and no, we don't depend on those every year here. You know, you figure 1 out of 3, you get 2 in a row, boy, you really hit the lotto. But I think it was cold enough. We're going to lose probably at least a quarter of the fruit off of those types of early trees.
With fruit trees, John, I've heard that they have a good crop every other year, but not every year. Is that true?
Well, it depends on how you manage them. That's not the idea. But if you do have a huge crop one year because you didn't get them pruned or something else happened, that does take a lot of energy out and leads to a decreased crop the next year. So that's why the commercial orchards on those super heavy years will thin the crop so that the fruit is, for an orchard, the worst thing is to have a completely loaded tree with about 4 times the normal amount, and they're all about the size of a silver dollar. That's not a grade A #1.
Well, Bill has
piece of fruit.
A plum tree.
Flowering plum of some sort.
And one year it had tons of plums, and Cince and I made plum butter. It was pretty darn good, if I dare say. And
never got any, John.
Yeah.
You didn't beg.
Not even a piece of toast.
Well, be that as it may, it never had them before. I mean, maybe 3 little plums, and it hasn't had them since.
This year it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be very sparse, I think.
Yeah.
Well, see, you're not managing your tree. That's what John said.
Well, and with plums you get into pollinators too. So that's a whole different.
Like bees, you need bees.
Well, you need a pollinator tree even, and there's 2 different subgroups of plums. You got the Americans and the Japanese, and so you got to have 2 of this kind or 2 of the,
North Korean?
So, yeah, something like that.
I think we just got one Norwegian
We're off
tree.
script here, but anyhow, you gotta. Some years you'll have just the right wind direction, and so a tree a quarter mile away may have pollinated it, and that doesn't happen every year.
Well, we got plenty of wind. I don't know about the direction.
Yeah, I have no idea where any other trees like that at all. But that has been unusual, Judith, in that one year was just a prodigious amount of. The birds all loved it.
Oh, yeah, they were happy, and so were Cince and I.
But if you want specifics, you better let me check the reference books on that one.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple different pollinator scenarios.
You don't think it's operator error, do you?
No, not a chance.
You talk about pollinators. We've had people in Logan County. In fact, I know one lady up at Hartsburg who's just going into the beekeeping business. But I was told by a beekeeper, not this lady, that there was a shortage of bees because we're such an agrarian community, and there's so much pesticides and herbicides being used that we need bees. We don't have them.
Well, there's been a lot of bee die-off, and partly because of weather, partly because of Verona mites. There's suspicions that some of our neonicotinoid insecticides have something to do with it.
What did he just say on the air?
Well, that was
the stuff you put on your tree for borers.
He said it on the air. FCC will be after us.
But there's conflicting studies on whether that's actually at the cause, but it probably can be viewed, certainly doesn't help when you pour something on the ground and it goes up through the entire tree and into the blooms and pollen. It could coagulate, accumulate in the bees and so forth, but a lot of it's due to the Verona mites. But
the end result is that the bees have died.
We had a horrible die-off after the bad winter a few years ago, and part of the other shortage is so many are getting into it. There's a demand, and the price of, queens and buying bees has gone up dramatically because we have a beekeeping introductory class in Springfield for our area with the beekeepers group down there, and it's full every year, and there's a waiting list.
Is that a fact?
That's 40, 50 people every year getting into it.
Who want to get into the
Yes.
apiary business?
Yes.
Because why? Because it's fun or it's lucrative?
Oh, I think it's one of those great hobbies that you can do, you know, and
make it a little.
down there they even have equipment the Beekeepers Association owns, so you can borrow one of their extractors and some of that kind of thing.
Well,
So
supposing I wanted to go to Burtonview and start a
Bee farm.
Bee farm for how would I go about acquiring?
you better take the beekeeper class, and they'll tell you all about it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
This lady did.
There's several that do, and it's great for pollinating your own things. The professional apiary folks are a little, how should I say it? They're uneasy about putting hives out for pollination purposes because it's really easy to put an insecticide into a spray program or something that's going to be collected by the bees and kill off hives. And some of these things are not actually under your control either because they forage over a large distance. So if you set it in the middle of your 50 apple trees, they go beyond that, you know.
How far does a bee fly on a given day? Have they done studies?
Miles.
Miles, literally.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
They're just such a little fellow.
They're workers. Yeah.
That's why they call them workers, isn't it?
Workers, yeah.
You mentioned a little bit ago about the spraying of the fields that are planted. What's the window that a farmer has? Because we have had wind this spring that defies anything in my memory, having lived here for 50 years.
We say that every year, Judy. You know,
how quickly I forget.
No, I don't think it gets any better, but it's become kind of a fact that we live with in the spring that the winds are much stronger than normal.
Yeah.
There's windows. They can go over a lot more acres with a sprayer than they can with a tractor and planter, so it doesn't take a very big window to stay ahead of things, but it depends on what you're doing. Some things it's not as time sensitive. Others you have to, like no-till burn downs ahead of soybeans. If you put the 2,4-D in, you're supposed to wait 2 weeks after you spray it before you plant. So people are starting to get a little bit ouchy about that, you know, that, hey, well, if I haven't got it sprayed yet, I'm now looking at 2 weeks, you know, before I go in and plant my soybeans. So different things.
You know, you have to be a gambler at heart to go into farming.
It's the biggest gambler in the world.
Yeah, because there are so many things you have no control over.
You have very little control over much of anything.
Mother Nature is in total control.
Now, and you mustn't mess with her.
Our farmers are good stewards of our land. Those who want to be real good farmers are real good stewards. This matter of herbicides and pesticides, it's all under control. I mean, there are regulations and rules and so forth about application and so forth. Can you just give us an overview of that, John?
Well, you have the entire gambit from folks who are certified organic.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they don't use pesticides. They're just naturally derived, particularly on the insecticide and the fungicide and for specialty crops such as grapes. They use a tremendous amount of sulfur for disease control, or the old Bordeaux mix, you know, the lime, sulfur, and copper. Excuse me, that kind of thing. Some of them use, they can use pure nicotine. That's an organic, you know. So that's one spectrum for folks who don't use, they're also using some gluten meal byproduct stuff. If it's made from an organic source, they can use it in an organic situation. You see this for like crabgrass control and in garden use, you know, sold in small batches.
But you know, you hit on something that I'm pretty naive about, I guess. When you talked about organic farming, most of us perhaps just assume that that's just Mother Nature with no help with anything at all.
And most of it's cold steel, you know. They cultivate, they work the soil, they hand weed, they, you know, whatever it takes to help, you know, that kind of thing. Usually it's done on smaller scales, you know. You get 250 acres of organic, and that's a ton.
Yeah.
You know, because you also...
When you're going to hoe it by hand, it'd be a heck of a ton.
They're not hoeing 250 acres by hand.
Man, you'd have to get up before breakfast.
But they're using an older system of multiple cultivations after they plant, you know, to try and control the weeds. And there's nothing wrong. It's a production method just like any of the others are. And
is it more labor intensive?
Sure. Yeah.
You mentioned that they use naturally occurring materials like nicotine and gluten.
They can.
But, well, now all of a sudden people are finding themselves needing gluten-free things. And, of course, nicotine, people don't smoke anymore. It's just not socially acceptable at all. And how in the world does that, do those kinds of chemicals not affect the food, whatever it is, that they're put on?
Well, some are taken up and put throughout the plants, and others are not. They're just where you put them. And most of the folks around here that are doing organic production aren't using them, but they are an option. Just like conventional farmers have a whole list of folks associated with their fertilizer chemical dealership locally, and they offer a lot of products. They're probably not going to use more than one or two, or, you know, they're trying to be good stewards and also to make a buck. And if you throw the kitchen sink at everything on either side, whether it's organic or conventional production, it costs money.
We have to be good stewards of our sponsors, and in that right, we're going to take a short commercial break, and we're going to come right back and bring in John Fulton, a man who knows everything about agriculture that there is to know. And we're right back live in the studios here at WLCN. The program's Viewpoint. Our guest this morning is Dr. John Fulton. I say Dr. John Fulton because he's about the same thing as that as an MD is in the farm world. John.
Not hardly.
Well, we think you are.
Just allow us that little extra privilege. Extension advisors. Let's go back to history of that just a minute, Mr. Fulton. The University of Illinois. The beginning of when did we first have an extension advisor here in Logan County?
Extension and Farm Bureau chartered in December 1st of 1917.
17.
And the first one, the office actually opened in February of 18. Back in those days, Extension and Farm Bureau were the same. The
synonymous
agriculture advisor and the county Farm Bureau manager were the same person, so it was a split salary arrangement, and you had to sell so many Farm Bureau memberships in order to get your farm advisor or ag
Is that
advisor.
Right?
Yeah.
That's well, you had to have a quota of
you
memberships.
had to sell, I want to say it was 500 memberships in the county to get that office started officially, because the State Farm Bureau, for example, was celebrating their centennial this year, whereas many of the counties, I think Logan, Menard, and Sangamon were all the same date on December 1st of 18. I'm bringing up my calendar, or my thing here, because I've been working with Farm Bureau on some of that history, so I've got a list of the ag advisors.
All right.
If I can
first
find
one I know is J.H. Checkley. Who goes before him?
Well, the first one was Elmer Ebersol.
Oh, I knew him well.
He was only here from 1918. See, I have to go through several pictures to find my right one, but I'll try and talk as we go.
Is there an advisor in each of, or that covers all 102 counties in Illinois, John?
Well, there used to be. And things are so different after, I think, gee whiz, I've been through like 11 reorganizations since I've been in.
Wow.
And the last 2 have been more major. But Elmer Ebersol was the first one, and I have a copy of the first annual report he filled out in 1918, and then Checkley started in 1921 after Ebersol, and then after that was Anderson.
Nelson Henry Anderson.
You're a good man. N.H. Anderson's what I got. They all used to go by the double initials like the professors back in the day. And he was here till 34. And then, started in 34 and was here till 49, I believe, and then Fred Hoppen.
Fred Hoppen came aboard.
Many would remember, and after him was Harold Brinkmeyer.
Yes.
And right in that era is when Farm Bureau and Extension had the official split because of the other farm organizations complaining to USDA it probably wasn't proper.
Oh, really?
Because they felt like Farm Bureau members, for example, had more services available than folks in the Farmers Union or the NFO or Pickin' or the Grange, whatever. So, and then after Harold Brinkmeyer was Charlie Englehart, and then I came after Charlie.
Yes.
You've been with us how long now, Mr. Fulton?
Well, since 83.
Is that right?
That doesn't sound as bad as 30 some years.
But
I started young, Bill.
You're like a good vaccination. You
I remember when you moved to Lincoln. You were 4, weren't you?
Pardon?
You were. I remember you singing in the choir.
No.
Yes, you did.
No, I did not.
At Emmanuel?
No, I did not.
Well, who was it impersonating you?
I told you, senility sets in.
You're probably thinking of Mr. Moon.
No.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know him.
Back when did they? At what era? What point in time? You know what old Billy remembers is the rotations. You'd have to rotate your crops, and then you have to have a legume crop in there, and let one field lay fallow for a year, and so forth. At what point in time in our calendar, John, did we just, because of advances in the technology of farming, get away from that route? It was an absolute. That was just a route that you had to follow.
Well, and really, post-World War II era, I think, is when you really began to see the rotations start to go from long-term to shorter-term rotations, and we started getting a few commercial herbicides like the 2,4-D and atrazine were a couple of the first ones for corn. And folks started specializing. Everybody says, well, in the old days, every farm had, a dozen or two of cows and the same
livestock,
same of sows. And we're producing a lot more livestock, but people who are good at it are doing it now. The family operations, many of them have 1,500 or more sows. And that's not looking at folks like the mash-offs, But they've taken that capacity. Same thing with the dairy operations. Every farm used to have a milk cow.
At least,
And if you milked a dozen, you were selling or bartering milk, and that was a lot of work to go to, so some guy put in a specialized system with the old strap bucket milkers and did a dozen of them and took up the capacity of milk from 12 farms.
My grandfather milked 10 cows a day, twice a day. I often think, what do you do with all that milk? I guess we drank a lot of it. But,
and a lot of it went back to livestock.
It went back into the livestock.
Well, you used to separate the cream off and sell the cream. And now the skim milk's a premier product, and of course the ice cream and butter markets and so forth use that butter fat. But you sell the milk, and the milk component was as valuable. It's a rotten era of economics for the dairy producers right now.
It is. 648-5510. Somebody might have a question of Mr. Fulton. John's always kind enough to come visit with us a couple times a year, and it's always a joy for Judy and I. I always walk out here with something I didn't know about.
Amen.
So you might have a comment or a question for Mr. Fulton, 648-5510. John, it costs a lot of money to put a crop in the ground today. What would be the minimum acreage that a farmer could get by on in today's economy?
There's really that hasn't changed through history. Some folks, if they're raising specialty things, going the organic route, something like that, you can make a. The boys and I used to raise cut flowers. 1/10 of an acre was a lot of cut flowers.
Oh, yeah.
That's all hand labor and labor intensive, so it depends on what you're doing. If you're thinking corn and soybeans, those are mass-produced things, and unfortunately right now, Bill, the less acres you have, probably the better off you are. You're looking at potentially losing money after paying rent. So I don't know how to answer that question. You can get by with little to no equipment other than the harvesting equipment. You can get a used tractor and a little small planter and be set to go with less than $10,000 of investment, but your returns probably aren't going to be real high either, and it depends on whether you own the ground or you're trying to lease it, that kind of thing. 3 acres of strawberries is a big operation and can provide a lot of income, or an orchard or asparagus or some of these other things that we're seeing more and more of.
What? Pears. You're into pears.
Well, the fire blight has its definite negative effects on the pear operations, as Jim has found out.
Jim understands all about the pear market.
You were sharing the list of advisors with us down through the years, and it'll be 100 years. So you're working hard, I'm sure, on some kind of a centennial.
Well, Extension actually celebrated the centennial last year.
How come?
Because Extension in the state started in 1914.
Okay.
And so we had some regional things and so forth. And Farm Bureau, I know they're working very hard. And we actually had a 75th celebration, Farm Bureau and Extension together with an open house and so forth. So hopefully they'll include us again. But we come from common roots.
Yes, you sure do. What about the lawns? Is there anything you mentioned when we were off the air, this chickweed and stuff that's just rampant?
It had a very good start last fall, so it had a very good spring. The chickweed and the henbit, everybody says, well, what's turning the fields? This year it was purple, and that was the henbit. And, we get the butterweed some years that's yellow and turns everything yellow, and then there's also yellow rocket and some of the hay fields. But basically we had a mild fall, and fall lasted well into December, like Christmas time, and so things got a good start. Those are winter annuals. They probably germinated last September, October, and were little tiny little things that you don't even notice. And they sit there through the winter, and they grew root systems. So come February, they pop up and take off like gangbusters. And then heat of the summer, they'll be dead and gone, but they would have dropped seed for next year's crop.
Yeah, so then it's not outside the realm of possibility that come next spring, all these would come to life again?
Well, from seed that's going to germinate next fall.
Yeah. So we'll have a good crop next year of that too?
You don't know. If it just germinates in the fall and you get a freeze,
hard freeze,
1st of November, for instance, you may kill some of that stuff. But
well, I hope that's what happens.
John, other than trying to make a living, which is of course the goal, what perhaps would be the biggest problem a farmer would be facing in today's economy?
Keeping up with everything. There is so much regulation that goes into everything from, we were talking, I think, off air about the pesticide licensing process, farmers to use restricted products, which would include atrazine and most of the insecticides, they have to go through and take a test, to prove to the state that they're proficient enough to be able to buy and use those things.
While they're on their own ground.
Same thing for the commercial guys, but they've got at least one test that's twice as big as the farm one, and then if they're the supervisor doing the recommendations and so forth, there's category exams. And most people just think, oh, they got a test. Well, that's for the guy driving the equipment. That's on the safety, the environment, first aid, and physical properties, and can you figure out how much you put in the tank and so forth. Then there's the specific tests. There's one for field crops. One time I had 6 category exams. You have field crops, you have turf grass, you have right-of-way, you have small fruits, tree fruits.
Who dreams all this stuff?
Aquatics, mosquito control, seed treatment. Those are all different categories that folks doing that type of work have
to pass test.
Yes.
Before they can do that. See, Joe and Josephine Smith driving down the country road, they have no cognizance of the fact at all that these gentlemen are really, in effect, licensed farmers, so to speak.
Well, and then you get into the regulation with trucking, for example, your product to market. They keep changing all the commercial things and the CDL aspects and the farm waivers for so many miles away from the farm, and it takes a lot to keep up, and that's why so many of them depend on the farm organizations to help them do some of that kind of thing. Extension has been involved in that too, but as our presence in the commercial ag part has dropped off because of reorganization and dilution of, we don't want to go into the budget, but dilution of dollars, you mentioned Creekside, with Dennis Campbell. We have master naturalists now, like master gardeners, who are heavily involved with Creekside and activities out of Kickapoo Park locally and all over, Illinois. There's groups of those volunteers. So we've gone in a broader range from the beginnings of agriculture and youth were the first 2 programs, and home economics got added in a little bit later, and then community development, and now we're running a lot of volunteer programs, and they include the 4-H program, the master gardeners, the master naturalists, and so on. So life changes and you try and roll with the punches, I guess.
You mentioned keeping up with all this legislation, which would be virtually impossible for every single farmer in the world. But how much can you legislate the transference of your product, your farm product, from your farm to the elevator?
Oh, it's pretty tremendous.
I just can't imagine. I mean, I guess I operate by the KISS theory. Keep it simple, stupid.
Well,
just put
weight
it in
restrictions
the truck and
all that apply, and most of the folks up at the Farm Bureau Legislative Office will tell you the devil may not be in the legislation; it's in the regulation. It's in the regulatory rules everybody's writing, and it goes so far and broad. The water quality standards, the air quality standards, all those things are affecting agriculture as well, and farmers are responding in large part. You're starting to see more cover crops, and that is to prevent nitrogen in particular from leaving a field in the fall. So they put up cover crop to soak up the nitrogen, and then when they die, they re-release it for the next year's crop. So that's why some of those things are there. The rotation Bill mentioned, with having winter wheat or something, that utilized nitrogen that was there from an alfalfa or a soybean crop. So now we're kind of making an artificial rotation, putting something out there that might graze some cattle on if it's turnips or peas or something like that. But it's also taking that nitrogen up, going to hold it there so it doesn't get into the water system.
A fall scene rarely seen today, very common. You'd see fields of corn stalks burning. Don't see much of that today.
Probably saw more of it this year because of the floods and so forth, and the stalks were extremely thick. So I know some plot work was done burning stalks, but it doesn't help the soil organic matter and so forth doing that, and that's part of what we're after with soil health, is to increase the organic matter, which increases the holding capacity for water and nutrients and all that kind of thing.
Which is imperative.
It sure helps.
John, the clock expired on us. I don't like that. I'm going to talk to the management about that and see if we can do something about slowing that clock down between the last 10 minutes. If we could then stretch that into the last 15 or 20, it'd be a lot better. In any event, John Fulton, we appreciate very much your being with us. As I indicated earlier today a couple of times, and I could say it more often than not, you're always very gracious to come up here. And it isn't like he didn't have anything to do, Judy.
Oh, gosh, no.
So he's very gracious in coming up and allowing us this time. We always try to close the Viewpoint with a comment about the subject matter of the day, and I found this at Lakota Indian Sitting Bull said this, and I thought it was pretty profound. Some of those boys were pretty profound at that.
Yes, they were.
Behold, my friends, the spring has come. The earth has gladly received the embraces of the sun, and we shall soon see the results of their love. It's a straightforward comment by one of our Native Americans. Thank you, John Fulton.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you.